E as tarifas de Trump agora estão ameaçando o Brasil. Viramos o alvo dos Estados Unidos, mas o motivo não parece ser econômico. Afinal de contas, os Estados Unidos têm uma balança comercial positiva em relação ao Brasil. Vamos ver o que jornalistas americanos e canadenses estão falando a respeito desta situação. Não se esqueça de deixar o seu like e, se você gosta deste tipo de conteúdo, se inscreva no nosso canal. Vamos para o vídeo.
But then this afternoon, Trump did address a major U.S. trading partner, Brazil. He plans to hit Brazil with a whopping 50% tariff rate. Trump says it is partly because of how the country has treated its former leader. Former president and dear Trump ally Bolsonaro is facing charges that he plotted to overturn his election loss back in 2022. Trump called for an end to that trial and ordered an investigation of Brazil's trade practices towards the U.S. Earlier at the White House, Trump was asked if there was a formula he used to come up with these tariff rates, and I want to share his response.
The formula was a formula based on common sense, based on deficits, based on how we've been treated over the years, and based on raw numbers. They're based on very substantial facts and also past history. You look at the past history, we never had anybody in the White House that understood the numbers or were into it like I.
All right, well, then let's talk about credibility as it relates to Brazil. The president goes ballistic about the U.S. trade deficit with every country. That's the reason he wants to do this. But for fact's sake, the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative says that last year we had a $7 billion trade surplus with Brazil. And in his letter, Trump also raises, I said it a moment ago, the former President Bolsonaro's prosecution. Doesn't this show that this isn't about trade deficits? This is about the president yielding his power. He's saying he doesn't like how the former president is being treated. He wants the trial being canceled. And that's how he now plans to use our trade policies for his political agenda?
I mean, look, Stephanie, it's a great point. He's being very clear that the actions on Brazil don't have anything to do with trade, right? It's about the handling of the criminal charges against President Bolsonaro.
Which has nothing to do with U.S. manufacturing,
Absolutely.
U.S. consumers, or U.S. jobs.
And it gets to, I think, something Isaac was talking about, right? He sees tariffs not as something to kind of change this whole array of unfair trade practices, but they are a tool that he has to wield power and bring people to the table, right? But by continuing to delay this, not implement them, go back on his word, these countries are going to be sitting there, markets aren't reacting, right? But these countries are going to be sitting there being like, okay, how fast do we need to make a deal? Because if he continues to push the deadline back, where is the impetus for them to come to the table and be like, no, we have to make a deal, we have to make a deal?
Trump now has his spending bill passed. His tariffs in his own way are moving forward. He can no longer say any of this economy is Joe Biden's economy. So how do you assess what we have in front of us?
It's actually okay right now. If you think about it, we've seen unemployment kind of be static here. It's not kind of moving one way or another. We've seen inflation kind of go in the right direction. Obviously the big question here is if we don't have these trade deals, if they keep some of these tariffs in place, if they put reciprocal tariffs in place, then you do have inflation sort of ticking up. You also have, the White House really stepping up as far as deportation. And that's something that a lot of key businesses here in the U.S. rely on. Obviously, we've seen agriculture. They've been lobbying the president. They're going to have to get a bailout. What does it mean in hospitality? There's a whole host of different industries here in the U.S. that are going to have a really hard time. Labor has been a big source of inflation, right? You throw these taxes on, and that's what they are. Make no mistake about it. Somebody has to eat those tariffs, right? Whether it's the supply chain, whether it's the importer, and whether it's a consumer. And so
most likely a combo of all three.
Right. And listen, that's not great for economic growth here. It's not great for economic growth around the world. And so if we think about this economy, that's doing okay. Like make no mistake about it. He's got a tailwind from this tax bill, at least the way CEOs are thinking about it, at least the way high earning consumers are thinking about it. We saw what happened in 2017, 2018. It actually worked for consumer confidence, for business confidence, that sort of thing. And then if you put together what he's been able to accomplish geopolitically, and I'm not saying this is some, worthiness of a Nobel Peace Prize or anything like that, but he's got some clout right here. He's got some political capital. And the one thing, and this is what Isaac just said, I think with the stock market at all-time highs, he can kind of feel that a little bit, right? The stock market has rallied 30% from those lows. Interest rates, right? We were talking about the really interest rates. The bond market is the thing that spooked him. He said it got a little squeezy or something like that or whatever. Well, yields are just flat from that period.
Yes.
They're not doing anything. The dollar weakness, that's something that was definitely going haywire in early April. That's actually good for the U.S. economy. It's good for U.S. multinationals that sell a lot overseas, right? So you think about it, there's a lot of things going in their direction, and I don't believe they're going to screw it up too badly. I don't believe, going back to your point, that, I just don't think people believe that whatever he's going to do, as far as it relates to the market and the economy right now, is going to put us in the situation where we were in early April. So that's not a bad place to be very honest with you.
U.S. President Trump has stepped up his attack against Brazil, first by words and now by action. He has imposed a 50% tariff on Brazil, the highest among the 21 countries that received Trump's tariff letter in the last few days. In the letter, Trump blames Brazil of insidious attack on free elections, free speech, rights of Americans, further goes on to blame Brazil for blocking U.S. social media platforms and threatening them with penalty. Moreover, this levy is linked to Trump's support to former President Jair Bolsonaro, but one cannot deny the fact that this comes just days after Trump warned BRICS nations with an additional tariff if these nations indulged in anti-American policies. Further, it needs to be noted that it is the first BRICS nation to receive a letter after this warning and the second BRICS nation to have received the letter in this series. This move by the United States is facing the anger of Brazilian President Luiz Lula da Silva, who reacted saying, and I quote, "Any unilateral tariff increase will be addressed in accordance with Brazil's economic reciprocity law." Now let's take a look at US and Brazil's trade. US is Brazil's second largest trading partner after China and has a $7.4 billion trade surplus with Brazil, while US goods imports from Brazil stood at $42 billion in 2024. Its exports to Brazil was around $50 billion. To understand the impact of US tariffs on Brazil and if this can be seen as an action taken against the BRICS bloc, we're now joined by Richard Baldwin, Professor of International Economics at the IMD Business School. Thank you very much, Professor Baldwin, for joining us. Today, European markets, US markets, and markets around the world opened largely in positive territory. Investors were brushing off these concerns raised by tariffs that Donald Trump has imposed over the last few days. Why do you think this is happening?
Anticipate. And the markets, I think, largely anticipated that the tariffs would go up in this phase. And what happened actually this week was that for most of the countries, the tariffs went up by less than was said they would go up in April 2nd. So in some ways, it was a lot of non-news. Moreover, the deadline was pushed from the 9th of July to 1st of August, suggesting that their eventual tariffs might be even lower. So having already put into the market the idea that the tariffs were going up, what actually happened this week wasn't much news. And I think that's why they reacted as they did.
Right. I'd also like to ask you about Brazil. Specifically on the issue of treatment to Bolsonaro, President Trump imposed a 50% tariff on Brazil. Now, Brazil has vowed to hit back. Do you think this is now a clear case of weaponization of tariffs by Donald Trump?
Oh, yeah, this is way out of line with everything else he's talked about. And in fact, the legal authority he used to justify the tariffs on April 2nd, in which Brazil only got 10%, viewed the U.S. trade deficit as a national security risk. But the U.S., as you pointed out, has a trade surplus with Brazil, not a deficit. So the idea that he's now using this to justify some complaint about some other country's internal judicial laws undermines the legal standing of the whole tariffs. So I think that, one has to keep in mind that this won't be the first time that Donald Trump announced something very exciting and then backed off a little while later, simply to generate the headlines and get the energy out there, but then back off. But it is completely out of line with all the rest. The rest was mostly based on bilateral deficits.
Very interesting conversation we've had with you, Professor Baldwin, and thank you very much for giving us an overview of Donald Trump's policies and how much of this he can actually execute in the days to come. Thank you so much once again for being with us.
Então, amigos, o que vocês acharam da opinião dos gringos a respeito da situação? Será que os americanos são a favor ou contra as tarifas ao Brasil? Deixe nos comentários a sua opinião e nos vemos no próximo vídeo.